Now, I got an email from Cynthia, one of my correspondents, actually. And she references a column that I'm going to share with you momentarily by Jennifer Rubin in the Washington Post about where the blame for all this really lies. And I want to share with you, first of all, what Cynthia wrote. She writes, "Hi, Mike. Our problems are from blame all around. Failure of ethical leadership and character, anti-democratic devices installed into our legislature, voter suppression, and perhaps most of all, failure of the voters to be educated and to take an active part in our system, both by voting and demanding the changes we want and need. I firmly believe," she goes on, "that our system can work just fine when it's not hobbled by all of the above. I often hear people say, well, if only we had a parliamentary system, our problems would be solved. No, they wouldn't. Germany's parliamentary system didn't prevent Hitler. Israel's parliamentary system didn't stop Netanyahu. For either system to work and prevent the rise of pigs like Hitler to Netanyahu, ultimately, it's going to take more than just the system itself." And I think Jennifer nailed it when she said in her current column, quote, "So yes, reform the system and vote for better people. But the only real solution to what ails us is a surge of democratic activism, civic involvement, and collective rededication to our constitutional system. If that happens, the rest will follow." End quote. Jennifer Rubin. Cynthia concludes with, "Of course, that also demands the lying liars like Trump, Fox News, and the rest get called out too, with an end to such propaganda that brainwashes people into stupidity." Love your show, Cynthia. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for writing very much. And thank you for including Jennifer's column, which, I'm going to share part of it with you. Jennifer Rubin, one of my favorite writers, she's at the Washington Post. She points out that two of the year's best books on politics are presenting contrasting diagnoses for what is making American democracy so sick and appear to be on its deathbed, which is what I worry about. But she quotes, or she mentions Liz Cheney's Oath and Honor, a memoir and a warning. And then the other book, Tyranny of the Minority, Why American Democracy Reached the Breaking Point. That's by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt. But in the first, in Cheney's book, she points out, Jennifer points out that book, Liz Cheney's book, lowers the boom on the mendacious and cowardly Republicans and the now 4 times indicted former President Donald Trump, who the Republicans enabled in nearly destroying our democratic system. And I would jump in, if I could, to what Jennifer wrote and say, Miss Rubin, it's not over. When you say by nearly destroying our democratic system, you're leaving out the fact that Trump is still walking the earth. The Nazis around him are still setting up this government in exile that will take over as soon as Trump defeats Joe Biden or starts screaming and farting and wheezing and threatening violence if he loses and demands that the laws be overturned like he did last time. So in nearly destroying our democratic system, Ms. Rubin, with all due respect, I hope you're right, using the word nearly. Anyway, the second book, the one, Tyranny of the Minority, as Jennifer points out, it cites the structural protections for the minority in the democratic system that have been exploited by the orange bastard to the point that self-government is threatened. And you can see real-time evidence of this every single time that one of these Nazi spokesmen for Trump uses our right to a free press to further inflame people in this country. A. B. You can see it in real time every single time. Our judicial system that was set up to protect the innocent, not to protect the guilty, but to protect the innocent who have been charged with crimes, is exploited and misused by the Antichrist. And that's what Rubin is talking about. Protections for the minority that have been exploited to the point that self-government is now threatened. But Jennifer takes it one step further. Miss Rubin, I should say, takes it one step further. And this is what Cynthia was pointing out. Both books do make a very salient point, but neither book puts the blame squarely where it should be. And we already know, don't we, where it should be. It should be on us, on the American public. Ms. Rubin goes on, Cheney's memoir takes us through the events leading up to the 2020 election, the attempted coup, investigation that followed. And in granular detail, she explains how a maniacal narcissist insistent on retaining power bent weak men and women to his will. Had Republicans not played along with the big lie, not signed a brief attempting to disenfranchise millions of voters, had they not raised bogus objections to electoral votes, had they not maintained those bogus objections even after the assault on the Capitol, had they not acquitted Trump in his second impeachment, had they not continued to curry favor with him, this nation long ago would have done away with the only president ever to refuse to transfer power peacefully to his successor. End quote, Jennifer Rubin. The two books that Jennifer Rubin is referencing in her column today, she goes back to Cheney's account, and as Rubin points out, that is an indictment of the Republican Party, because it's become a party that prizes, that worships power over principle. And it worships craziness over this country. And along the way, in this book, Liz Cheney's book, she singles out disreputable lawyers, opportunistic apparatchiks who work for the Orange Antichrist, deceitful right-wing media figures, you know who they are, who would not only stand up to Trump, but also attack those who did. And Cheney, as Rubin points out, makes a powerful case that no written constitution or statute is sufficient to deter, men and women determined to act in bad faith and even deploy violence. And that is something that I think we're all aware of at this point. When you have a criminal rat like Donald Trump, a subhuman son of a bitch now worshipped by the Christians in this country, when you have someone like that who knows how to manipulate his followers, it doesn't make any difference what is written into our law books, our Constitution. It makes no difference what philosophers have talked about, political philosophers have talked about over centuries. None of it matters anymore. All that matters to the followers of the Antichrist is to do exactly what the Antichrist tells them to do. And it doesn't make any difference who is hurt, who's ignored, who is destroyed, what country is burned to the ground, what constitution is ripped up. They don't care, because they have become absolute followers in a cult, the cult of this orange Antichrist. And I've said this before, and I know you agree. How in the hell could anyone find anything worth listening to, following, respecting in a filthy subhuman like Donald Trump? It's just, it will always astonish the hell out of me. Now, few people would argue, as Rubin points out, few people would argue that Republicans still prize character in their leaders. Not anymore, honey, honest to God. But a poll 5 years ago found during the time that Bill Clinton was in office that, quote, Republicans by a 22% margin were much more likely than Democrats to say it was very important for the president to be a moral leader, end quote. Now, that's what it was said in a Gallup poll referencing all the way back to the 90s when Bill Clinton was in power, right? The pollsters who did this, the Gallup poll, they say now, with Trump, or back when Trump was in office, Democrats are more likely than Republicans to hold the view that a moral leader is necessary by 14 points. Isn't that interesting? I think it says a lot for not just the filthy, stinking worshipers of the Antichrist, but it also says something about the people who would identify as Democrats. You know, you can't have it both ways, my fellow progressives. Either you prize, so to speak, moral leadership in all cases, or you don't. And as Jennifer Rubin points out, rules and norms and laws are empty. They mean nothing unless you have decent patriotic leaders. And I think this is a big mistake, if that's the right word, that the framers made. They never assumed that some filthy pig like Donald Trump could ever reach the level of power and control that Trump has reached. And it's a given, is it not, that we can't survive as a democratic system when the leaders of one of the two parties give up on truth and loyalty to country and self-restraint and become just screaming, wheezing, blathering, murderous followers of the Antichrist, which is what has happened. The Republican Party, please, I'm sure you've gotten to the point now where you realize that the Republican Party no longer exists. It just doesn't. It's a maggot-dripping corpse, still walking around, carrying a Bible, draped in Bibles, really, most of them held upside down, screeching and screaming out Christian platitudes that mean absolutely nothing to the people doing the screeching. Nothing. It's just a way of control. Control of them and control of anyone else who happens to fall into their orbit. Now, that's Liz Cheney's book. And as Jennifer Rubin points out, by contrast, Levitsky and Ziblatt, the people who wrote the other book, which is Tyranny of the Minority, Why American Democracy Reached the Breaking Point, these two authors explained that elements designed to prevent mob rule and emergence of an executive despot, those elements have become a fortress for a political minority. And that political minority is white, mostly rural, and Christian. I just never, as a young person, I never thought I would see the word Christian, capital C, follower of Christ, linked with tyranny and destruction and disease of the mind and disrespect and immorality. And I never did. Did you? Did you think that when you were being brought up a Christian, if that's the religion that was pumped into you when you were a kid, like it was pumped into me, did you ever think? Well, I digress. So, what I sense here, what I'm reading here is Rubin saying pretty much what I've been screeching and yelling about for years now. And that is the American people saying, in one voice, if we can, well, maybe not, but if just 10% of us said we've had enough, we're not going to have a bloody revolution, we're not going to have a revolution at all. What we're going to do is walk out into the streets and highways and interstates of this country, and we're going to sit our asses down, 35 million of us, and we're not going to fucking move until the Congress of the United States rewrites the rules so that we can get to the level of democratic governance that the framers imagined 200 plus years ago. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.